Asking for some himself, gotta get some respect. He's only focused on what he wrote. His will is beyond reach, and now I don't want
Alabama falls to LSU for the first time in 8 years, and guess what? Chaos ensued. I'm Zach Harris, and this is For the Love of Sports, a show by a fan for the fan. And if you want to get in touch with the show, you can on Facebook at For the Love of Sports or at Fox Sports 980. If you want to get in touch on Instagram at the number 4_ the love of sports. Also, you can tweet at the show at the number 4_ love of sports. Old school, you want to talk about the big game last night between number 2 LSU and number 3 Alabama, living up to all the hype that has been billed for that game. The number's 518-690-0980, 518-690-0980. First of all, LSU, outstanding. Bama shot themselves in the foot a lot early in that game, including the first drive of the game where there's a mysterious ghost fumble by Tua Tagovailoa that ultimately leads to LSU driving down the field and getting a touchdown and really setting the tone for that game. I'm not going to say that Alabama lost this game. I'm going to say LSU won this game. Yes, Alabama shot themselves in the foot. Yes, they had a mysterious fumble. They had a turnover right before halftime. The defense gave up a lot. Just the list goes on and on. But you know what? LSU took advantage of everything that Alabama gave them. And when you play a team like Alabama, that's exactly what you need to do. You take a look at the times that they've lost either at home or on the road. It's been the opposing team taking advantage of what Alabama gives. And this defense, no, it's not as big and great as it was over the last 10 years. But this is still a very solid defense. This is still a defense that puts up some of the elite numbers, not the elite numbers you're used to. This is not your typical Alabama defense. But they give up openings. You have to be perfect and precise with your passes, which we all know Heisman hopeful Joe Burrow is one of the most precise passers in college football right now. And you know what? Alabama, when they turned the ball over, LSU went ahead and scored 17 points in the first half off of turnovers. That's a big change. You're talking about a 16-13 game right before half that due to a turnover, all of a sudden, next thing you know, it's halftime and it's 33-13. Yes, Tua was coming off ankle surgery. So 20 days later, 21 days later, whatever the official number of days after his surgery, he's back in that game. And I don't care. Surgery is surgery. Not being able to practice, being limited in practice, that really changes how you're going to play that game. You can't simulate the game aspects of a game. You can't simulate the pressure that you're going to feel having to run away from tacklers. You can't. So I think the fact that Alabama's defense tightened up in that third quarter and until the very end on the last couple of drives by LSU really held their own against LSU in the second half, we're talking about a different game. You're talking about a game where Alabama ended up scoring, 28 points in the second half compared to the 13 that they gave up to LSU in the second half. We're talking about a completely different game. And I think the fact that they were able to do that against an elite team like LSU that should be ranked number 1 overall, it's going to put them right back in the playoff contention. Right back in the playoff contention. And I know what you're saying. I know you got that talk in your head of playoffs. Talking about playoffs? Looking at Alabama talking about playoffs. Well, guess what? They're not done. They are not done. You take a look at the teams that are ranked right around them, and we can go through the list right now. Ohio State, according to CFP, currently ranked number 1. They rolled through Maryland. Who hasn't rolled through Maryland? Then you have LSU obviously beating number 3 Alabama 46-41. Then Alabama falling, same score. Penn State falling to number 17 Minnesota. So now they have a loss. They're ranked number 4. Clemson undefeated. They rolled through NC State. Who cares? NC State's not that good. Then you have Georgia, who beat Missouri 27-0. Oregon 8-1. They were off. Utah 8-1. They were off. Then you had Oklahoma escaping with a 42-41 victory over Iowa State on a failed 2-point conversion by Iowa State at the end of the game. So you take a look at these teams, and this is exactly how I'm going to put it. So my list right now, LSU is number 1. If you've listened to this show since college football has started, since Joe Burrow finally got that new offensive coordinator able to take advantage of his skill set, I've been saying over and over again, LSU is the team to beat. LSU is absolutely the team to beat, and they've passed every single test to this point. You take a look at their big wins. At number 3 Alabama, at Texas, who, yes, they have 3 losses, but that's still a tough road game going to Texas and beating a team that had championship aspirations going into the season. Obviously, their season hasn't gone exactly how they wanted it, but that's still a big win at Texas. Then versus CFP's number 10 team, Florida, and CFP's number 11 team, Auburn. So big wins. Their remaining schedule at Ole Miss, versus Arkansas, and versus Texas A&M. Then you take a look at number 2. My number 2 team is Ohio State. And why is it Ohio State? Because their only big win on the season is against number 13 Wisconsin. Granted, they did dominate that game 38-7. Slow start a little bit for OSU, but they really got it going later in that game. They're my number 2 team right there. Best thing about them, no close calls. Not like Clemson, where they almost faltered to a UNC team that's not ranked and can't even sniff a ranking right about now. So OSU, they still have a lot of chances to be showing why they're the number 1 team, because their next 3 games of the regular season go at Rutgers. Nobody cares about that. That's basically a bye for them. Then versus right now's number 14 Penn State and at number 14 Michigan. So there's 2 tough games right there at the end that could put them right back in that number 1 spot. But right now, the way LSU is playing, they're playing out of their mind. They're my number 1 team. But, and there is a but, LSU, if you watch that game against Alabama, they put their blood, sweat, and tears in that game. And if you know anything about football, when you get that emotional and that much of a high, not only during a game, but after the game with a victory, you have a hard time getting up for that following game. They basically took this game against Alabama as their Super Bowl, or their natty, if you want to say. This was their national championship against Alabama. Now, I liked what Joe Burrow said after the game, where he said, listen, we beat Alabama. That's one of the things we set out to do. But we still have more at task. We have more that we want to accomplish this year. Then you had Ed Orgeron, who is a very good and very underrated coach. He's jumped around the league a little bit, but finally found his home at LSU. Was like, we did this for the state of Louisiana. This is the first time that Alabama's lost to LSU in 8 years, but guess what? The tides are changing. Then he goes into the locker room after he's crying, after his pregame interview, crying and everything, all the emotions in the locker room. He's like, roll tide, what? And then F you, meaning that the tides have changed, that this is LSU's house. This is no longer Alabama's house. Well, guess what? Nick Saban's been doing it for 10 years. Granted, this is not the same team that he's had for 10 years. But you best believe this man is not giving up on the season. He takes every loss as a learning experience. You got a lot of young guys on that defensive team. And you know what? They're going to learn from this loss. They're going to get better. Now, LSU, I'm high on them. I've been high on them all year. This is where they really need to show me something. Next game at Ole Miss. And I know Ole Miss is nothing to bat an eye at. They're 4-6 on the season or something around that for the season, but they have a young quarterback, a mobile quarterback. You're coming off that big high of defeating the number 3 team in the country. Not only the number 3 team in the country, a dynasty, an Alabama dynasty. You finally beat a dynasty team that you've been dying to beat for 8 years. So to come off that high and go into Ole Miss and beat them soundly would really help me showcase what this LSU team can do moving forward for the following 3 games, as well as the SEC championship and then into the college football playoffs. But yeah, coming off in a high like Alabama game where there's so much emotion, shedding so much tears, all the love and support, and it's for the state of Louisiana and everything, they need to show me something against Ole Miss the following week. I'm not saying Ole Miss is something to bat an eye about, but when you're coming off that much of a high, it kind of makes this game that much important. Get back to my top list for college football playoffs. So we had Clemson coming in at number 3, just behind Ohio State. I don't know why they were whining, because this was set up. They were at number 5 on Tuesday, and Dabo Swinney's coming out talking all this smack. Dude, you had LSU and Alabama playing. One of them is going to lose. One of them's going to fall. It happened to be Alabama. They're going to fall. How far? We will have to figure that out. Clemson. You also had Ohio State that has to play Penn State in 2 weeks. So even if Penn State didn't lose to Minnesota, the number 17th ranked team, they still had Ohio State on their schedule. So Clemson, you hold tight, because you haven't played anybody all year. Their big wins, none. And the problem with them is they had a close game against UNC. But also the great thing about that close call against UNC, they've been dominating and outscoring their opponents by a large margin since that close call to UNC. And you know what? They're going to coast to an ACC championship. They're not going to have to play one single ranked team, and they're going to cruise. As long as they do their job and win their games, they're going to be in the Final Four. Then you can decide, hey, we've been disrespected. Let's go and get this natty. But their next game against number 19 Wake Forest just got blown out by Virginia Tech. So they're going to fall right there. And then they go to SC to play South Carolina. Nothing to bat an eye against right there. My number 4 team for now is Georgia. In a simple fact that Georgia is my number 4 team is because they had big wins against number 15 Notre Dame and number 10 Florida, and they lost a good game earlier in the season against a tough South Carolina. No, they're not something to bat an eye about, but anytime you get those interconference games, it's a little different. Their remaining schedule is at number 11 Auburn versus Texas A&M, and then at Georgia. So their schedule, or Georgia Tech, their schedule isn't anything to bat an eye at, but they have to beat Auburn. You have to do what you need to do against Auburn. My number 5 team, I'm taking Alabama. Their big wins, they don't have any big wins on the resume, but they've dominated every single game they played. Just like Ohio State, other than that Wisconsin win, don't have any big wins on their schedule, but they've dominated every team that they played. Clemson, other than that scare against North Carolina, they've dominated every single game. You take a look at Alabama, they've dominated every single game, and they lost a close game to the number 2 team, what should be the number 1 team in the country. And you know what? They did that on a one-legged Tua Tagovailoa Heisman hopeful quarterback. They did it like that. They overcame a 33-13 halftime deficit with multiple chances to win that game. They pulled within one score 3 different times in the second half. 3 different times in the second half. So that's why they're my number 5 team. Their remaining schedule, it really doesn't matter until the last game of the season. They're at Mississippi State, then versus West Carolina, and then finishing up, the Battle of Alabamas. You got Alabama versus number 11 Auburn in Auburn. That's going to be the game that's going to push them back into the top 4. That's going to be the game that shows them. Obviously, they have to do their work. They have their work cut out for them. They have to win. But that's going to be the game that says, hey, Alabama didn't win the SEC conference, but they're unequivocally better than these other teams we were thinking about for top 4. Then after that, I'm putting Oregon. Oregon still has a lot to show me. They haven't really beat anyone of note, just like Alabama, but they've had some struggle wins. They've had a struggle win against USC. They had a struggle win earlier in the year. They need to show more. Then you take a look at some of the stats that are going to back up what I'm saying and why Alabama's still right up in here. You take a look at the All-State playoff predictor, still a 41% chance of Alabama making it in the top 4. That's the best of any of the remaining teams outside of the 4 that are going to be ranked on Tuesday. Then you take a look at ESPN's Football Power Index, updated top 25 after this week, after Alabama already lost. And you have Ohio State 1, Clemson 2, Alabama 3, LSU 4, Georgia 5. Right there. That just shows you Alabama's right there. Then we have a Alabama hater, Kurt Herbstreit, coming out and saying, my new top 4 after week 11, after Alabama lost to LSU. I got LSU number 1, Ohio State number 2, Clemson number 3, Georgia number 4, and then Alabama 5, and then Minnesota number 6. That's his team. And he's an avid hater of Alabama. So get that sour taste out of your mouth, because this Alabama team, as much as they shot themselves in the foot, as much as LSU dominated that first half, as much as they had a hobbled Tua Tagovailoa, they still hung in there and lost by 5 points to the number 2 team, which should be the number 1 team in the country. You look at the AP poll, they are number 1. So if you think that Alabama is going anywhere other than doing their job, learning from this loss, and getting back into the playoffs, you're dead wrong. I'm Zach Harris.